I'm delighted to be back with you at OLLI. We have 4 sessions each Monday, dealing, as we have titled it, Around the Political World with John Rothman, which you all know is also the title of my podcast, which now has about 450,000 downloads. Uh, I agreed to do this because I think it is so important that OLLI prosper and do well, and I'm happy to contribute in some small way to ensuring the success of this program. And of course, we all remember Kathy Henderson, and so I always dedicate what I do at OLLI to her memory. Okay, I've had to revise what I want to do with you on a number of occasions. Get ready for your questions because we will take them after I finish the initial
I
presentation.
need volume. Hello.
I want to begin with a grade for Donald Trump. Many of you know that I've taught a course called Rating the Presidents over the years, and one of the things that I've always tried to do is to rate presidents fairly. So I want to rate Donald Trump in terms of his exercise of presidential power. I am going to give him an A. Now, don't be shocked, because all of you understand the impact of the President of the United States. Who is president matters. And Donald Trump has demonstrated not only that he matters, but that his ability to influence events is critical. So I want to break this down into several different parts. Obviously, I cannot cover everything, but I will do my best to cover as much as I can. The first and foremost thing we have to deal with is the latest effort by Donald Trump, confirmed by the Republicans in Congress with no Democratic support, for his great, big, beautiful budget plan. This morning, of course, we are all reeling from the shock of what happened in Texas. And if you are listening carefully to the events as they unfold, you know that one of the things that everyone is watching is whether or not the cutbacks in NOAA, the weather alert system, has had an impact. I listened this morning to Senator Ted Cruz, who suggested that it's too soon to do that kind of an evaluation, but I'm going to chime in that the mayor of the key town affected received no notice of any problem, and I think that is a critical factor. When you have budget cuts, you have consequences. Now, there are those who are suggesting now that Donald Trump made a campaign pledge. He made several campaign pledges, and I'd like to evaluate those with you in a certain order, if you will. The first observation is that the big bad budget bill is going to have a huge impact on America. It's going to have a big impact not only on our weather alerts, but it's also going to have an impact on the fact of Medicare and Medi-Cal being cut back. Now, what is important to understand is that the president pledged that there will be no cuts in the general medical aid which has been available. But we now know that some 20 million Americans automatically are going to be impacted by the elimination of this program. It is a scaled back program, and that is of deep concern to everyone, particularly rural hospitals across America, who are now going to face the prospect of having to close their doors. Uh, Now, let me try to explain the rationale. The rationale is that by saving the nation money, we will ultimately emerge stronger as a people. Let me be clear that this bill adds $3 trillion to the national debt, something the Republicans swore they would never do. But understand also that the Republican Party, and I want to talk a little bit about that, is no longer the Republican Party. It is the party of Donald Trump. So what we need to understand is that when the evaluations are done on these remarkable changes and shifts in the way America functions, what we are going to see is that the Republican Party will have to assume the burden of the responsibility. Now, I want to go straight from that, although we'll return to it, I'm sure, to a few other issues that to me are very important. You may know that the question of immigration is critical. Those of you who live in Marin County understand the number of Hispanic residents in Marin County, and the impact of ICE's crackdown, including what is happening now in Marin. All you have to do is take a look and see around you in terms of the changes that have taken place in the Hispanic community. President Trump invoked a 1798 law to accelerate what he's doing. The 18th century law, called the Alien Enemies Act, is designed to speed up mass deportations of immigrants. You understand it was a 1798 law passed when John Adams was president of the United States. It was invoked during World War II when Franklin Roosevelt used it to detain 17,000 Japanese, 11,000 Germans, and 3,000 Italian foreign nationals. This according to the Brennan Center for Justice in New York. Why would Trump invoke the Enemy Aliens Act? Why? Since taking office, Trump has authorized the deportation of millions of migrants, including those who were granted temporary legal permission by President Joe Biden to be in the United States. These deportations have been carried out so far that would ultimately lead to the expelling of some 11 million undocumented immigrants who live in the United States. At least 3 million of those immigrants have temporary permission to be here and protection from deportation, according to the studies which we have now examined. The acting ICE director has even removed in late February, amid frustration among White House officials, that the agency was not arresting people for deportation. But it is clear that is precisely what they're doing. And if you've been watching the ICE raids, it's scary. Let me remind you that the Enemy Aliens Act really could be a centerpiece of a mass deportation proposal. And that is what the president is invoking. What is the Alien Enemies Act? And I want to be very clear about this. The Alien Enemies Act, enacted in 1798, is a wartime authority, and I want to underline that, a wartime authority, authorizing the president of the U.S. government to summarily detain and deport civilians from enemy nations merely on the basis of their ancestry under the pretext that they are alien enemies. I want to remind you, and I think it's very important to point out, that this is what was used for the internment of the Japanese. And I emphasize that because we in California understood the impact of the internment of the Japanese directly and profoundly. The law originally targeted white Europeans, not immigrants of color. And that is also important. President John Adams, with the backing of the Federalist-controlled Congress, passed the act, and this is important, to prevent European immigrants, including French, radical, and Irish people who tended to support their political rivals, from immigrating to the United States. In other words, we did not have an open border, and that's why the Alien Act was adopted. The federal government used the Alien Enemies Act during 3 wars, and I want to underline the fact that these were used during wars. During the 3 wars, the War of 1812, to limit where British people could live, during World War I, to intern German and Austria-Hungarian nationals, and during World War II, to detain Japanese, Italian, and German immigrants. In 1988, the United States government formally apologized to Japanese Americans detained during World War II, acknowledging, and this was during a Republican administration, acknowledging its use of the Alien Enemies Act was a grave injustice based on, and I quote directly, racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and was carried out without adequate security reasons. Donald Trump is now invoking this act, even though, and I want to underline this, we are not at war. It is directed against people who are Hispanic primarily. And this is something we all need to be aware of. I have to tell you, There are people who are Hispanic who have asked me, and they're longtime residents of this country, who have asked me what they should do. I said, carry your papers with you, your passport, your citizenship papers, whatever you need to do. Not that they necessarily will be looked at, as we are learning, because we've heard about the deportations that have taken place. Has there been an attempt to repeal the Alien Enemies Act? In 2010, then Representative Mike Honda, who was a South Bay Congress member, championed a bill to repeal the act, but it never made it to committee. In 2020 and in 2021, Ilhan Omar of Michigan led another unsuccessful attempt to repeal the act. Look, there is no doubt there is a fear abroad in the land. People are afraid. My sister's son married a young woman from El Salvador. Her mother lives here. She is not a citizen. She is terrified even to go out the front door. I want you all to be aware that there is a fear abroad in the land. There is a question that has been raised legitimately about people who come to this country illegally. Do you remember who the deporter in chief was? The deporter in chief, ladies and gentlemen, was none other than Barack Obama. Pure and simple. Every president has been concerned about this. And when I am told, and there are people who tell me that there were open borders, I'm absolutely horrified because there were no open. Now, there's another aspect of this that concerns me greatly and should concern all Americans. So you're rounded up and you can be deported, and the Supreme Court, and we're going to get to the Supreme Court in a moment, the Supreme Court has now allowed for deportations not to your country of origin, but for instance, to South Sudan. Are you all aware that if you applied for a visa to South Sudan, you couldn't get it? Why? Because South Sudan is not safe. And yet, we are deporting people with the permission of the United States Supreme Court without any proof that they've done anything wrong. And in fact, we know that there are people who have been rounded up for deportation who have done nothing wrong. They're not criminals. And we know that the president is also creating internment centers. I want to say a quick word about what is happening now in Florida, in the Everglades, where an alligator Alcatraz has been created. Have you watched in the last few days the flooding that has taken place in that particular facility? The mosquitoes there are a danger to everyone. And yet people are being moved into these facilities that are completely unfit for any kind of service. And may I add, they're rounded up with no opportunity for appeal. And we have a situation here in our own Bay Area. Some of you can look out your window and see the island of Alcatraz. The president has ordered that Alcatraz be refurbished in order to be used again as a place to hold prisoners. And do you know what he talked about the other day? He talked about putting sharks around Alcatraz. I read this, talked about it, was so appalled I can't even begin to tell you. Can you imagine? This is not far distant. This is not in Florida. This is right here. I can look out my window and see the bay. This is something that needs to concern each and every one of us. And of course, the president has also instituted a ban for U.S. travel. Afghanistan, once our close ally, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Myanmar, which was Burma, the Republic of the Congo, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen. Do you know there is a travel ban by executive order by the President of the United States and restricted U.S. travel to Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Venezuela, and Turkmenistan. These orders were issued by the President of the United States with full authority. There are so many aspects of this that it's very, very concerning. The inclusion of Afghanistan angered many who were veterans of the Afghanistan war. And by the way, those who worked with the United States military, those who worked with the US military, are now being denied the very basic asylum that they were guaranteed. And this is an executive order by the President of the United States. I want to point this out. The power of the president is amazing. I also want to point out student visas. Student visas are being pulled across this country. And by the way, again, this is a unilateral action. And although the Supreme Court theoretically should put a hold on it, it's not stopping the Trump administration from proceeding. And this affects all of us because it affects the University of California, where many of you have children, grandchildren who've attended. And Stanford University officials say they learned of 6 visa revocations during a check of student just taking place now. I must tell you that this is absolutely horrifying. The chancellor of the UC San Diego campus confirmed that the university was notified without warning. And he said the federal government has not explained their actions. Now, this should concern every American. And so that's the reason why I'm raising this with you now. I was very concerned earlier this summer when President Trump, in a comment, said he's unsure about due process rights. Do you hear that? Unsure about due process rights. Those rights are laid out in the Constitution of the United States. And it is very clear that what the president is asking for is to not follow what the Constitution calls for. This is, to me, very, very concerning. The Fifth Amendment, I would remind you all, provides, quote, due process of law, end of quote, meaning a person has certain rights when it comes to being prosecuted for a crime. And I would remind you in the 14th Amendment, it says, no state can, and I quote directly, deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Did you hear that? No person within its jurisdiction. President Trump has said he was pushing to deport some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And he believes the courts are getting in the way of his being able to do that. I want to be crystal clear on this. Many of the courts have upheld the rights of individuals. By the way, you don't have to be a citizen of the United States to have your rights upheld. If you live here, you have that right. And you may know that many state leaders have slammed President Trump for blocking education funds. We're going to see a real impact here in California. And I believe that every child will feel the impact of this disruption. And we are going to really understand our reliance on federal funds and the president's unilateral actions should make us all very, very concerned. Now, we just observed the 4th of July, and I want to be clear on this as well. The 4th of July is a celebration of American independence, American liberty. And I could not help but reflect on this 4th of July what our founders would have thought of what Donald Trump is doing. Now, I want to back up. I began this particular session by indicating to you in the strongest possible terms that who is president matters. And I gave Donald Trump an A. And some of you are no doubt furious at me for doing that. But remember what the A is for. The A is for being an effective president, using his power effectively. Whether you agree or disagree, what this president has done is to set in motion what we will call and what he calls a unitary executive. A unitary executive, and you can Google the term, is a theory promulgated several years ago by the Heritage Foundation and other very conservative think tanks that says the President of the United States is the person who should be responsible for everything, and that the presidential power should be virtually unchecked. This defies balance of power. When the Constitution was written, the design was set up clearly so that one person could not have power, absolute power, that there would be an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch. I want to pause now and talk about what has happened in this regard. The executive branch is the President of the United States, and it doesn't matter who is president. You can go back, and as I have with you when I've talked about presidential power, over many, many administrations. We have never seen a president exert the kind of power that he is exerting today as effectively. Not even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at the height of his presidential power, 1936, 37, 38, when he had massive majorities in the House and Senate. Not even President Roosevelt was able to accomplish that. And so now we have to think about the power of a president. But we have to talk about the balance of power as well. Republicans control the House and the Senate. Now, some of you know that I've been a student of American presidential history and congressional history most of my life. I have never seen a Congress roll over for a president of the United States as I have witnessed in the last 6 months. The Republicans in Congress are virtually a rubber stamp for anything Donald Trump wants. And the interesting thing is, from a legislative point of view, you can, as the United States Senate did, affirm his latest action, this great big beautiful bill, by a tie vote, but with Vice President Vance breaking the tie. And so, literally, by one vote, the nature of our system is changed. The same thing applied in the House of Representatives, where by 4 votes, the House was able to affirm this budget. It is fascinating for me to watch how congressional leaders, and I'm speaking now of Republicans, are willing to surrender power to the President of the United States. And let me point out that this president has said if you don't go along with him, he will primary you. And that, my friends, is a tactic of bullying, which should disturb all of us. And now a quick word about the Supreme Court. Many of you who have taken my classes over the many years I've been with OLLI know that I've always reminded you in advance of an election that the President of the United States, that's not the only thing you're voting for in an election. You're voting for the nominees for the Supreme Court, because if you know that you're going to have a president like Trump or like Biden, you understand the nature of the judges that are going to be nominated. I will never forget my old friend Shirley Breyer Black, who is Stephen Breyer's aunt and Charles Breyer's aunt, who described to me a moment in time when George Bush defeated Al Gore because of a Supreme Court 5-4 decision. And Shirley looked at me and she said, "John, do you understand? It would have been the Breyer court." The simple fact is that who is president matters. And you and I know that had Al Gore been elected president, the whole course of history in terms of the court would have been changed. The court now has a 6-3 majority for conservatives. And you are seeing Donald Trump winning every major battle that comes to the Supreme Court. I must tell you how disturbing it is. And you may know that there are some who are suggesting that the federal courts are not mandated under the Constitution. And you actually have the majority leader of the United States Senate suggest that the federal district courts should be abolished. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, and you have to be concerned about it. Now, let me indicate to you that if we had a Democrat in the White House who was pulling the kind of imperial presidency that Donald Trump is pushing, I would be just as horrified. I want everyone to understand that I believe in a certain balance, that if a Democrat or a Republican violates that balance, they deserve to be opposed. When Franklin Roosevelt in 1937 proposed packing the United States Supreme Court, had I been alive, I would have opposed it with every fiber of my being. And some of you were critical of me when I suggested to you that when it suggested that Joe Biden add justices to the Supreme Court or recommend justices be added, I opposed that because the issue is not how many people are liberal or are conservative who serve on the court. The question is whether or not you have a president who nominates a balanced group. Many years ago, there was a book written called In His Image, which described Richard Nixon's attempt to model the Supreme Court. And of course, you all know that that Supreme Court, in the end, voted that Nixon had to give up his tapes. And that, in the end, brought about the end of his presidency. You must know that 4 of the justices on the court during that judicial proceeding were Nixon nominees, with William Rehnquist recusing himself. Now, why am I pointing this out to you? Because a justice of the Supreme Court has a lifetime tenure and theoretically should not be indebted to anyone in the process of their service. Let me point out to you that I can tell you before a vote is taken how Scalia and Thomas will vote. But then again, I can also tell you how the 3 liberals on the court are going to vote. And that means that there are a small number of justices, including Amy Coney Barrett, including the Chief Justice John Roberts, upon whom all of this hinges. What we are seeing is that the 6 conservative justices are voting as a block, which means that you can predict, essentially, the outcome of major cases. This is very disturbing. But remember that when Donald Trump ran for the presidency in 2016 and won, he promised that he would put justices on the court who would rescind Roe v. Wade. And that is exactly what happened. So none of us should be surprised. It is interesting to note that there is nothing we can do to prevent this trend because the Republicans control the Senate and the presidency. And so there have been moves in the House of Representatives to investigate certain aspects of this president. All of them have been rebuffed. And may I point out that includes the question of the efficacy of his being president of the United States and still making millions of dollars, including cryptocurrency, including, well, I'm not going to enumerate all of the things that Donald Trump has done, but it is something that causes grave concern. Let me say a word about a third party. And I was asked by Kellum and Gina to address this. As you know, there is now a threat from the former best friend of the president to create a third party, which he announced would be called the American Party. That rang a bell with me because this is not the first time that someone has attempted to do this. The American Independent Party of George Wallace got on the ballot in all 50 states for the 1968 election. And of course, the simple fact is, and this is what I want to talk about, that third parties don't win elections. The last third party to win a national presidential election was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And I would remind you that when the Republican Party was created in 1854, uh, they ran candidates for the House and Senate in order to achieve legitimacy. It was not until 1856, when the Republicans lost the presidency, their nominee for president was John C. Fremont, but they did capture the House of Representatives, which meant that there was a Republican Speaker of the House. And that paved the way for Abraham Lincoln, who won, frankly, because of a divided country. The Republican Party was not the majority party. Lincoln only got about 41% of the national popular vote. But he did win the electoral vote in large measure because of the South and the advent of the Civil War. Third parties today are spoiler parties. And you can see that when a person tries to create a party out of whole cloth, say a multimillionaire wanted to do it, the last one to do it was Ross Perot. And Elon Musk reminds me of Ross Perot because he's creating his own political party, his own political vehicle. But I would remind you that Ross Perot's political party failed dramatically. And although it had an impact, and I think in the election of 92 was instrumental in Clinton winning the election, uh, Perot's impact was limited. Jill Stein, you will recall, the perennial candidate for president, the Green Party, no doubt had an impact in one race, and that was in 2000 with Hillary Clinton in 2016. But the race we remember most vividly was Ralph Nader, who ran in 2000 and who was able to take away enough votes from Al Gore in Florida to swing the election to George W. Bush. Now, I've interviewed Nelder, and I asked him this, Nader rather, and I asked him this question, and he denies responsibility. He says, "No, no, I had nothing to do with that," but of course he did. Third parties are spoiler parties. So let's assume that Elon Musk launches a party. The only way a political party, a third party, succeeds is if you build from the ground up. That is what the Republicans did in 1854, 1856, and 1858. They ran candidates for the Senate, the House, for governorships, and they built a political party. We had an example of this, of a one-man party, if you will, in Jesse Ventura, who you will recall was elected governor of Minnesota as an independent. You will note his administration of 4 years was a failure. Why? Because Democrats and Republicans alike opposed Jesse Ventura's legislative agenda. Uh, I do not believe that the creation of a new party will make a difference. Now, I want to swing this back for a moment and point out that when Donald Trump is gone, the Republican Party is going to have to rebuild. And rebuilding is a very tough thing. But again, it's important to note that when Herbert Hoover left the presidency, the Republican Party was in complete disarray. And it took them 20 years, from 1932 to 1952, to ultimately elect a president. And that was a national hero, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who would have been elected president whether he ran as a Democrat or a Republican. And remember, Eisenhower did not declare that he was a Republican until the spring of 1952. So my point to you on this is you cannot simply create a party. You have to have somebody who can run, because we don't vote for parties, we vote for people. So it is a very interesting dynamic. And it goes to show you how having a lot of money may be a good thing for some, but it can be a terrible thing for others. The reason we are now facing the tragedy we have faced in Texas is because under the leadership of Elon Musk, NOAA was castrated. They did not have the early alert system in place. And you'll hear this being bandied about now, and they say it's too soon to talk about it. We've got to just concentrate on praying for all the people. I've heard this so often, and I think it's bunk. You want to know the reason why a tragedy happens. If my child were killed, I would want to know what the reason was. Why wasn't there an alert? Why didn't the mayor of the town know what was happening? And of course, the answer is because the cutbacks are so clear and so severe. So there is a question you have to pose, and that is, will there be a backlash? Fortunately, we have three more sessions after this to assess that damage. But I want to turn to foreign policy for a few minutes. And I realize I have a time limit here, but I can't resist. The first thing I want to do is to explain to you that when it comes to foreign policy, a president is king. There are very few constraints on a president. And let me explain to you about the War Powers Act, which some of you are asking, why wasn't that applied when the United States hit Iran? And the answer is because the War Powers Act is not a restraint on the president. Quite the contrary, if you read the War Powers Act, you will see it's a very different kettle of fish. Uh, the author of the War Powers Act initially was Senator Thomas Eagleton of Missouri. You'll recall he was for 18 days the nominee of the Democratic Party for vice president in 1972 with George McGovern. I want, again, to be crystal clear on this. I interviewed Senator Eagleton, rather, on a number of occasions. I interviewed McGovern on many occasions, as many of you know. But Tom Eagleton was fascinating because he's the one who came up with the War Powers Act initially, and he wrote the initial War Powers Act bill. In the end, Tom Eagleton voted against his own legislation because it had been modified. And as Senator Eagleton indicated to me, it was because instead of limiting the power of a president in terms of the kind of action taken in Iran, it widened the powers of the president. So I want to indicate to you, there were some Democrats who said, well, we ought to sue over the War Powers Act. They have no standing and no ability because the War Powers Act does not prevent a president from acting. Pure and simple. And so I want you to be aware. And now let's talk about what happened with Iran. There is no doubt that Iran was moving to develop a nuclear weapon. There is no doubt that the Grand Ayatollah referred to Israel as a cancer in the Middle East and actually asked the question, how do you treat cancer with radiation? There is no doubt that Iran's neighbors are all thrilled at the destruction of Iran's nuclear capability. And all you have to do is talk to the Saudis. They couldn't be happier. By the way, had Iran had that capability, Saudi Arabia would have demanded that we give them the capability as well. And you should be aware that right now, Saudi Arabia is under the American nuclear umbrella and has been for some years. Will this prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon? No, it will not. All it did was to retard the efforts of Iran to develop that nuclear capability. And when President Trump said that the nuclear ability was obliterated, he was wrong. As all of you know from the reports by the IAEA, Iran could be up and running with a nuclear program within 6 months. I want to point this out to you because no matter what side you fall down on, everyone agrees Iran should never have a nuclear capability. There's no dispute about that, at least not in the United States. And number two, there is no doubt that not only Israel, but Saudi Arabia and our allies in the Middle East were thrilled by our decision to use bunker buster bombs. Let me tell you what they were more thrilled with. They were more thrilled with what Israel did preliminarily, in which the entire leadership of the Iranian military was wiped out. You have to marvel at what the Israelis have done. It is one of the most astounding stories in world history, and it will have, I believe, a positive impact. I'll talk more about the Middle East in a subsequent talk, but you all know that we wait with bated breath today as Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, visits the White House. Let me make a quick comment. Netanyahu is not necessarily a beloved figure among certain audiences in the United States. But I want you to know that in Israel, even his opponents, even his most radical opponents, believe that Benjamin Netanyahu did a brilliant job in pursuing the destruction of Iran's nuclear capability. Will it save him in the next election? I couldn't tell you. But he did get a huge bump. And I am in touch with many of Bibi's critics, and I can tell you they were absolutely thrilled at what Netanyahu was able to pull out in terms of all of this question with Iran. The meeting at the White House, which I believe is taking place even as I speak, I will no doubt talk about in greater depth next week. Let's leave the Middle East for a moment and turn to Ukraine. What is happening in Ukraine is the ultimate tragedy, and you may know that the president, who said he'd solve the problem within a few hours of his assuming office, had a long talk with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. And as you know, as soon as that conversation was over, the Russians fired more missiles, hit more directly on Ukraine. Kiev, the capital, has been devastated. And I must tell you without any doubt that the president is also restricting certain arms munitions which were going to Ukraine. Who is picking up the slack on that? The Europeans. The Europeans want to make sure that Ukraine fights back. Why? Because they are concerned that the Russians still have goals of taking over Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and yes, even Poland is concerned. I want you to understand that this major foreign policy crisis exists, and its successful conclusion will depend in large part on what the United States chooses to do. If we do not provide the necessary aid to Ukraine, the Europeans are going to try to pick up the slack. But without the United States, Ukraine's struggle is severely limited. And I want to point out as well that key administration officials, including Vice President Vance, have made clear that they oppose aid to Ukraine. By the way, in contrast, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, feels very strongly that aid should be continued. But I want to suggest to you that Marco Rubio's voice is severely limited in terms of impact. He is the weakest Secretary of State we have had in this country in generations. And that's a whole other topic where we'll talk about the power of cabinet officers. We'll talk about Marco Rubio, Kristi Noem, all the rest in the days ahead. Let me look at my watch. Yeah, I think I better leave you time for question and answers. Let me just summarize if I can. And I apologize. I've not talked about China, the issues with China, which are big. I didn't talk about the fact that another key cabinet official in Russia was found dead, evidently a suicide, so they say, just yesterday. I mean, believe me, I could go on and on and on about what is happening in the world. But I can tell you that we are focused in a peculiar fashion now because unlike previous administrations, this president has consolidated such power in the executive branch and the legislative branch has ceded so much power that essentially to monitor what's happening, you have to watch the White House every single minute. May I just take another moment and talk about Democrats? I know some of you will ask about where are the Democrats. I don't know how many of you read Hakeem Jeffries' comments or Chuck Schumer's comments. They were all splendid, but they don't have the votes. Do you understand? They don't have the votes to effect a meaningful change. And what that means is that the Democrats are impotent, completely impotent. And the only way they will achieve any kind of power is in the midterm elections. If the House and Senate flip, Donald Trump will be a crippled president, at least to a degree, in the last half of his second term. But all of that I will discuss with you in future lectures. Please note that I try to make them as contemporary as possible with all the latest news coming in. In fact, I'm sure even as we are speaking with you, that more news is being made. But I've tried to give you that sense now. And why don't we, Kellum, because I think we have some time left, let's open it up for question and answers. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, John. We have plenty of time. We have about 50 minutes.
Good.
Time
I
for
don't think it'll be
questions.
enough time, Kellum, but we'll give it our best.
Okay. The first one is a comment from Maria Teresa. If they gave passports to alien enemies, then they didn't do a good job with due diligence.
They didn't give passports. Passports require being U.S. citizens. And we are not talking about U.S. citizens. We are talking about people, some of whom are citizens of this country who are being rounded up. We are talking about some in this country who are here legally, who are being rounded up, and we're talking about people who are here illegally who are being rounded up. But do you understand, even people who are here illegally are entitled to the protection of American law? You can't just, at least you weren't able to until recently, you couldn't just deport someone because you wanted them deported. Go back to the Palmer raids in 1919, when during the Wilson administration, people from Eastern Europe, primarily Bolsheviks and Jews, were rounded up for deportation. Why did that stop? It stopped because the United States Supreme Court said it's not legal to deport people who are in this country without due process. Well, Donald Trump is saying you don't need due process. And what is happening now is that a lot of people are being caught in this web who are innocent people. But once they're in the web, it's hard to get them out. And I think that's the problem. Next question.
Okay, from Charlotte. We know that third-party candidates are historical spoilers, but we live in a divided country now, like Lincoln's. And have any of those candidates, Perot, Nader, Stein, been truly charismatic? With an incredibly influential multi-billionaire funding, might things be different? Might there be an excellent candidate funded by Musk who could win the presidency?
I hope not, because no political party should be funded by one individual. No party platform should be crafted by one individual. Party conventions need to be free and open. The tragedy of the Republican Party is that there was no Republican Party platform in the last election. It was dictated essentially by Donald Trump. The minute you have one person dominating a party, it's a disaster. I preferred the days when Democrats had a liberal wing and a conservative wing. For many years, the Democratic Party was not one party. It was the Northern liberals and the Southern segregationists. And in the Republican Party, there was a battle between the Rockefeller wing and the Goldwater wing, and even the Ford ring versus the Reagan ring. So I prefer days when you have that kind of controversy. I've attended conventions where there have been huge debates on the floor of conventions. Some of you remember the '64 convention in San Francisco. Some of you may remember the '68 convention in Chicago, the Democrats. I think it is very important to understand that you need to have within a political party a real debate. Once upon a time, and I attended all the platform committee hearings that were held here in San Francisco in '64. They were held at the St. Francis Hotel. And it was fascinating because you had liberals and conservatives clashing within the party platform. And then you had a battle on the floor of the Republican convention. And the same thing applied to the Democrats in 1968 in Chicago. I miss that kind of contentious dynamic because I think it strengthens the political party process when you have that kind of debate. I do not want to see an Elon Musk any more than I wanted to see a Ross Perot create a political party which becomes an extension of their political philosophy. That's not the way a political party should be built. And I hope Elon Musk fails at this as he failed, although he succeeded with his meat cleaver, if you will. But I hope he fails here as much as he did. And listen to what Donald Trump is saying about him now. Anyway, next question.
Okay. Gina says, how about Teddy Roosevelt and starting a third party?
In 1912, Teddy Roosevelt created the Progressive Party because he was denied the Republican nomination for president in a rigged convention. Had it been a popular convention, Roosevelt would have been the nominee of the Republican Party, but William Howard Taft was the incumbent, and he had a lock on what happened. His third party, the Progressive Party, failed miserably, and 4 years later didn't exist at all. So Theodore Roosevelt was building a political party based on his own personality. He was the progressive. But I would remind you the same thing applied to George Wallace. Although Wallace had never been president of the United States, he was a popular governor in Alabama and had a popular following in the United States. Remember, he did very well in the Maryland primary and in the Indiana primary in '64. And in 68, he felt he could launch a national campaign. But I would suggest to you that a political party built on the personality of one individual is doomed to fail. The only way you build a third party is from the ground up. You recruit candidates for the House and the Senate, governorships, you build a basis, a firm basis, and then you can have a national contention. And let me also remind you, in 1912, although it became the party of Theodore Roosevelt, it very well could have been the party of Robert La Follette, the senator from Wisconsin, who in 1911 suffered some sort of debilitating illness after giving a long speech and was knocked out of contention. So my feeling is that the two parties work, but you have to rework them. I've taught courses on the Republican Party in the past, and I would love to do it again uh, because the Republican Party has to reconstitute itself. There has to be a liberal wing and a conservative wing. You know, the tragedy in the Republican Party? There is no liberal wing. There is no conservative wing. And by the way, there is no Reagan wing of the party anymore. If Reagan were alive and he could see what was happening, he'd be rolling over in his grave. I mean, he would have been the first one to do everything he could to help Ukraine. He certainly wouldn't have allowed the kind of exploding of the national deficit the way Donald Trump has. And I'm telling you, and I believe this, and Kellum, if you'll hire me again in 5 years, maybe less, I think this will come back to bite the Republican Party. But the Republican Party will reconstitute itself, will go through the struggles, because to create a third party, getting on the ballot in all the states, building a coalition in the Congress, it just doesn't work. Doesn't work at all.
Okay. The answer to that question is yes, sure. Let's have you do that in 5 years or anytime.
Oh, thanks.
Maria Teresa says Kissinger and Nixon called Allende a cancer to be eliminated. We considered Pinochet a cancer. Victims have a long memory.
The answer is you're right. The Iranian people, even those who oppose the Ayatollahs, are very upset with what the United States did. We probably have created another generation or two generations of those who will oppose America no matter what. You're absolutely correct. But make no mistake, Iran really is a threat to the stability of the world. Not Iran the nation, but Iran the leaders. The way in which the Grand Ayatollah has conducted himself, he's even named, by the way, 3 potential successors, all of whom are radical Islamists. It's a serious problem. Look, the Israelis did us a big favor. They eliminated Hezbollah. They're eliminating Hamas, Islamic Jihad. The Israelis have done great damage to Iran, and they are doing it not out of a feeling of beneficence. They're doing it for their own national survival. Allende in Chile never represented that kind of threat to the United States, but we eliminated him because there was a fear of communism. And of course, we now understand the nature of that fear, which, by the way, was exemplified in the television special on Edward R. Murrow. Some of you will recall that when I was on KGO, I did a 5-hour special on Edward R. Murrow with the permission of the Murrow family. In fact, I'm planning to teach a class in the not too distant future on the impact of Edward R. Murrow. You know, we don't even have an independent media anymore. We don't have that sense of, well, that's a whole other topic of discussion. But I understand what you're saying, but Iran really is a threat. And you have to choose who the threat really is. But have we created enemies that will last for many years to come? The answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next question. Rachel says, are we really powerless to make ICE accountable and demand due process and humane conditions?
At this moment, yes, because we do not have a court that will restrict what ICE is doing. We do not have a court that will stand up for those individual liberties. That is a Supreme Court. We have lower courts that are willing to stand up and who are being overruled now by the courts. The expansion of presidential power is beyond my comprehension. There was a book, I recommended it once before here, called The Plot That Failed, was a book written about Richard Nixon's plan to centralize power in the executive branch. It only failed because of Watergate. Well, Donald Trump has nothing but success in trying to consolidate that power. And that's a simple reality every single day because there's no vehicle to stop him. You remember when Mitch McConnell did not vote for the second impeachment? And you remember what he said? He said, I'm not voting for the second impeachment because the courts will stop Donald Trump. And the courts failed. And that, believe me, is a black mark on American democracy.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte says, what is your sense of the impacts of tariffs at this time? Are any Republican citizens turning against Trump?
First of all, in my judgment, a president of the United States does not have the ability to impose tariffs. Trump is doing it with the acquiescence of the Republicans in the House and Senate. They have forgotten the Smoot-Hawley tax bill, in which, during the Hoover administration, uh, a tariff was leveled. And of course, it contributed greatly to the Great Depression. Uh, I don't believe the president has that power. I know there are challenges going through the courts now. I have no faith in the Supreme Court to overrule it. And I can tell you the Republican Party will rue the day when they gave a president this kind of power. I think that the Republicans ultimately will be defeated, and we will see the Republicans blamed for the Trump administration. And remember, it took the Democrats after Herbert Hoover, it took the Republicans, rather, 20 years before they retook the presidency, and they only did it with a national political hero, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And by the way, that Eisenhower could have easily been a Democrat instead of a Republican, and he almost was.
Okay, a comment here from Maria Teresa. He's taking medical insurance and Social Security from US naturalized citizens as well as citizenship.
No, he's not taking Social Security. He can't take Social Security. And he can't take away Medicare. But there is a program which you all are familiar with people who have problems affording medical care. 20 million Americans who are going to be affected by these cuts. And despite the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans say, oh no, nobody's going to be knocked off the rolls, we know they are. Watch the reaction as the rural hospitals begin to close. And will there be a backlash? I believe there will be. I think it'll be a severe backlash. Because remember, many of the people who are voting for Trump could not have imagined that they would be impacted in this way. And they are going to blame Trump for their losing medical coverage and a lot of other things. Let me just quickly, I didn't say a word, but I will. You know, we have a measles epidemic in this country. Measles, which was a vanished problem. And I blame Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And the greatest disgrace, how can you say the greatest? I mean, stop and think for a minute. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but one of the great moments of disgrace is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is in charge of Health and Human Services, a man who opposes vaccines, a man who says he will find out what the cause is for autism within 6 months. I think he's changed that now. The man who was given the power to fire the entire vaccine board with Health and Human Services. It's, may I tell you, unimaginable. Some of you will remember the great novel by Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is happening here. And people need to understand. This is going to affect every single one of us. Do you understand? If we have an elimination of vaccines or a reduction in vaccine care, just wait till the next pandemic. We're going to see deaths like we've never seen before. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm trying to be very pragmatic. I talk to friends of mine who are physicians, friends of mine who are school teachers. They're horrified by this, horrified, as we should all be. And remember that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was confirmed because he made promises to a few Republicans who voted for his confirmation. And every single one of those promises has been violated. But you understand, once you're confirmed, there's no way to go back and change your vote. This is something that, had I a year ago been invited to predict this, let me give you another example. Are all of you familiar with Project 2025, which was put together by the Heritage people? It's a blueprint for what Donald Trump is doing. Now, when some of us raised this question very strongly, and I did an hour special on this program, the Trump people said, "Oh, no, we have not, Trump had not even read Project 2025." Well, the people from Heritage are implementing it every single day. And I have to tell you, it scares the living bejeebers out of me because it is completely changing the nature of American politics and the presidency. Is there anything we can do to prevent it? No. Not as long as Donald Trump has a majority that is loyal to him in the House and in the Senate. So what do? We continue informing people and protesting and hoping, if you are a Trump critic, that the Democrats sweep the midterm elections. On the other hand, if you're a Trump supporter, you're thrilled. The Trump people believe this will usher in a new age for the United States of America, a much more positive age. And only time will tell whether or not they are correct. If they are right, the Republican Party will be the majority party for many years to come. If they're wrong, I think the Republicans are doomed. But that's just one person's opinion.
Okay, thank you. There's only one more question here, but I'm sure more will come in. Here is the question from Rachel. One person said to me that the military will stop Trump if he goes too far. But what would be too far? Although I don't think the military will do anything.
The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, indicated after the insurrection in 2006, in 2021, January 6th, that the military would not interfere in the politics of this country. Most of the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been dismissed. They are now Trump people, so I have no idea what will happen. I can tell you that the restraints on Donald Trump have been severely loosened, and that should concern us all. By the way, if Joe Biden were president, or Barack Obama were president, or Bill Clinton were president, and these kinds of things were taking place, I would be just as concerned. I think it is something we all need to reflect on very carefully. And it is something where there is no restraint now on what the military can or can't do. But Donald Trump just applauded the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as his own general. Well, that's not the way the military should be run. It's not a loyalty to a president, it's a loyalty to the institutions of American democracy. And General Milley said very clearly, we don't take an oath of allegiance to a president. We take an oath of allegiance to uphold the Constitution. But in the polarized state that we are in today, I don't know what the military would do. But fortunately, we don't have to cross that bridge just yet. We will in 2028 when we have a new presidential election. And the question then will be how that will all work out. You know, Trump is talking about all kinds of voting restrictions. And certainly, I'm sure he would use the military if he could. But I prefer to think of the military as Lincoln did when he fired General McClellan, or as Truman did when he fired Douglas MacArthur. I want the military to be an independent institution, not loyal to a president, but loyal to the Constitution. And I commend you to the fact that President Trump is still indicating that he would like to have General Milley recalled to the military service so that Milley can be court-martialed. By the way, General Milley was given a pardon by Joe Biden. Can you imagine that? And do you know why Joe Biden gave those pardons? He gave the pardons, including to his own family, including uh, many political opponents of Donald Trump, including Liz Cheney. He gave them because he wanted to preempt the ability for Donald Trump to prosecute or persecute his political opponents. Next question.
Okay, the questions are coming in. Caroline says, can you explain the blind loyalty to Trump? It's like a cult.
I think there are two aspects. One is that it is a cult, and the second aspect of it is fear. Donald Trump, that's why I gave him an A on the use of administration of presidential power. Donald Trump is a bully, and he is a man of tremendous willingness to use power to his advantage. He isn't constrained the way other presidents have been. You know, Richard Nixon in 1974 could have used the levers of power to stay in power. Richard Nixon could have declined to abide by the Supreme Court decision. Richard Nixon could have defied the courts. Richard Nixon could have done a number of things. But Nixon, whatever you think of him in a negative way, was someone who grew up admiring and loving the Constitution. That's not Donald Trump. And I want to apologize to all of you. I am not here as a partisan. I'm really not. If Joe Biden were pulling the kinds of stunts that Donald Trump is pulling, I would be just as outraged. This is not a question of being a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, a conservative. This has to do with the foundations of American democracy. Do you understand? I am doing everything I can to make clear that my criticisms are based on the fact that I believe in American democracy. There was an ad taken, I don't know how many of you saw it, let me see if I have it here. There was an ad taken in the San Francisco Chronicle on July 4th, and I clipped it. I was actually going to talk about it, but you know, I try not to have to use anything to talk about. I like to just talk off the questions that you have or things that I am concerned about. But this ad taken out by Democrats, oh, here it is. This ad taken out by Democrats and Republicans. No, wrong piece of paper. That'll teach me to have so many pieces of paper. Let me find it. Oh, here it is. You just have to look for it and you find it. It's headlined, "We still hold these crews, even though they are under attack. It'll take all of us to protect and defend people, their rights, and our future." And it's broken down as to personal freedom, separation of powers, equity, democracy in elections. And it's signed by leading Democrats, leading Republicans, and leading independents. And I guess they ran this ad in papers across the country. And it's true. I think everything they say is true. But there are people, as I tried to address in a previous question, who absolutely believe that what Donald Trump does is right. May I tell you something? No one is perfect. No political leader has not made mistakes. And the fact that Donald Trump is given a pass by the Republican Party and the disgraceful Speaker of the House of Representatives, I can't even begin to tell you how infuriating it is because I've known previous leaders of the House, Democrats and Republicans, who would be absolutely appalled by what the Speaker of the House is doing now, Speaker Johnson. Just appalling. Anyway, next question.
This is from Diana. Would you please address Trump's power in California? Can he override many of our state policies?
Yes, and you're seeing it now. In fact, I talked about the question, and there was a big article in the San Francisco Chronicle just the other day dealing with a question here. Let me see if I have it here. Dealing with a question of what we do on environmental issues. You all know that we have in California very, very strict rules relative to pollution and so forth. Well, now what we have is a situation that I find absolutely appalling, and that is all of those subsidies for electric cars, for solar panels. It's all going away here in California because of federal law. And is a considerable concern because I'm somebody but who has, I have an electric car, I have solar panels on my house. We go through the whole thing of recycling, and now we have an administration that's disparaging that. And in fact, you won't be able to get the tax credits that we've gotten for electric cars and for solar panels in 6 months. It's going to vanish. And that's because of Donald Trump and the Republicans. Now, let me ask you, anybody plan to go to Europe this summer? You notice what the temperatures are? Over 100 degrees. That there is a clear sense of climate change that is emphatic. There's no doubt about it. And yet, are you familiar with the fact that the Trump administration withdrew again from the Paris Accords, and the Trump administration is saying there is no climate crisis, that it's a myth. There is no climate crisis. Now, if you believe that, I have a bridge I'd like to sell you made out of gold. So when you start eliminating all of these additional opportunities for solar panels, for electric cars, for doing all the things that we've been doing, however feebly, in the face of the kind of disruptions in climate that we're seeing around the world. Somebody asked me why I live in San Francisco. I said, because so far San Francisco has been pretty good. We have our natural air conditioning. We still have it. You may have hot days in Marin, but so far we're being pretty cool here in San Francisco. But that's another concern that you into all of these things in great depth and understand that the Trump administration's impact is profound, and it is not something that's going to go away.
All right. Thank you. We've got a few more questions. Here's the
A
next.
few more, hell, we ought to be going on for hours.
We still get some time. John Trump says, what about the budget cutbacks at many universities? Can anything be done about that?
Let me be very clear about this. What is happening now is appalling. I believe in academic freedom. I even believe in academic freedom for people who I disagree with. And universities have all the tools that they want to prevent violence on their campuses. What we're seeing now is Donald Trump using the situation in the Middle East to so-called crack down on campuses. No, what he's doing is he's eliminating academics who don't agree with his policies. And I must tell you, this is something that profoundly concerns me because I am a university professor, because I am someone who has worked on campuses for years and years and years. And the idea of restrictions on free speech, yes, foreign students should have free speech too. It's an important element of who we are. And somebody asked me, well, John, as opposed as you are to terrorism and Hamas, what do you think when Hamas speaks on the campus? I say, God bless them. Let them speak. How else do you unveil what they really think? So when I hear student visas being canceled, when I hear about academic institutions like Harvard, let me tell you, Harvard's not perfect. But can you imagine the cutbacks taking place at Harvard University on research? Anybody out there have Parkinson's? Anybody out there have cancer? Anybody out there have, well, you list all of the research that Harvard, and not only Harvard, but all the major academic institutions do. And what is Donald Trump doing? He's attempting to limit them and remove their right to do that. And I must tell you, it concerns me. There are so many things that concern me these days, I can't even begin to tell you. And let me tell you, I am a Zionist. I am someone who believes in Israel's right to exist. I am someone who has defended Israel for years. And the torrent of criticism of Israel to me, by and large, is unjustified because it's an attempt to delegitimize the existence of a state in the world. But the idea of taking people on a campus who may be from foreign countries, who have disagreements with Israeli policy, and deporting them or removing them from their campuses that's not America. That's not democracy. That's not what ought to be. And I've worked on the campuses, as some of you know. I started after the Yom Kippur War, and I spoke on more than 150 college and campus universities here in the United States and Canada. And believe me, I would not have taken away any of those critics' right to free speech. Never. And in fact, there was recently I spoke because Donald Trump wanted to deport a dissident, and I stood up in his defense. I'm not afraid of dissent. Let me give you an example very quickly. I was one of the founders of the Israel Action Committee at UC Berkeley, and one of my colleagues, this is 1974, one of my colleagues was the head of the national head of the Israeli Student Organization, and wonderful fellow. And he was here on a visa. He wasn't a citizen of the United States. He was had a student visa. What if you had an administration that disagreed with him and wanted to deport him on the grounds of his political activity? I would have been outraged. And I feel the same way about those who want to deport uh, students who may support Hamas, but I'd rather have a public debate with them about what Hamas does. And I think when you deport somebody, when you silence somebody, you do a terrible disservice to freedom of speech. And I believe in freedom of speech. I have to tell you, I was one of those who defended the right of the Nazis to march in Skokie. Oh, they're not Nazis, they were Nazis. These were American screwballs. But I made a point of saying at the time, this was in the 1970s, that freedom of speech trumps everything. You have to have the ability to have freedom of speech. And I believe that with all of my heart. That includes, by the way, in the classroom. Can you imagine if I were going to be fired because of my political opinions? Can you imagine what you would say? You would say, well, we may not agree with John Rothman, but we enjoy taking his class. And I would say there are some who would be very critical of my thinking. That's fine. That's what academic freedom is all about. That's what we debate. But the idea of rounding people up, expelling them, uh, denying them student visas, it's frankly anti-American.
All right. Thank you. Rachel says, what is martial law and how could it be used?
Well, we've had martial law used in this country, never on a national basis. Uh, Generally, it's applied state by state. Uh, I don't believe martial law is reasonably used. There is some talk that if Donald Trump wanted to suspend national elections, he could declare martial law. I don't believe that would work at all. I believe states control their own election procedures. You all know that national elections are not federal elections. They are state by state elections. And if anyone were to try to obstruct the idea of a free and democratic election, uh, that would be unacceptable. By the way, Donald Trump cannot run for a third term. Just read the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, and you'll note those of us who hammered and hammered and hammered away on that, Donald Trump no longer talks about running for a third term. He can't. That's what the 22nd Amendment is all about. By the way, if I'd been in Congress, I would have voted against the 22nd Amendment because I don't believe in term limits. But nonetheless, that is the law. And Donald Trump took an oath under the Constitution, and he is bound by the Constitution as it was when he took the oath of office. So even if the 22nd Amendment were repealed, he constitutionally would be ineligible to run for a third term.
Okay, thanks.
You understand, I'm doing this all in a very abbreviated fashion, and I apologize to all of you. I could go into much greater depth, but I'm doing the best I can with limited time, and I blame Kellum for everything.
Well, we have 3 more weeks, 3 more sessions. Louise says, lately I've heard one of Trump's sons is running for the presidency in the next election. Your reaction, please.
Well, he might. Donald Trump Jr. has indicated he might run. There's also talk that his daughter-in-law may run for the United States Senate. But, do you remember when the Kennedys wanted to create a dynasty? It was going to be John F. Kennedy to 69, and then Bobby Kennedy would have 8 years, and then Teddy Kennedy would have 8 years, and then they'd elect somebody. It's all pipe dream. I do not believe that the American people will elect a dynasty. It certainly didn't work with the Kennedys. It didn't work with Franklin Roosevelt. Remember that his son Jimmy ran for governor of California in 1950 against Earl Warren and was defeated. and that Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. ran as the Liberal Party candidate for governor of New York in 1966 and was defeated. We may have members of families like in Kansas, Alf Landon's daughter, Nancy Kassebaum, was elected to the United States Senate, but we don't have political dynasties. We have people who come from families. Bob Taft is a great example. Bob Taft was senator from Ohio, ran for president, never nominated, but he ran. And his son, Bob Taft Jr., was a senator from Ohio for a while. So we have examples of people running for political office, but I don't believe America would do that. There's a wonderful book by Stephen Hess, who worked for Richard Nixon, called American Political Dynasties. And you read it and you understand the impact. I just don't see it. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump and Laura Trump, the daughter-in-law, all may have political ambitions, but I just don't see it. And by the way, just so you're clear on this, the Republican Party may now be a creature of Donald Trump, but that will not be so forever. Eventually, the house of cards collapses. And I believe that the economic chaos that has been created by Donald Trump will demonstrate the validity of my point of view.
Okay, thank you. We have just one more question from Diana. We may have more after that, but this is it. If push came to shove, do you think our military would fire on its citizens as per Trump's request?
No, I don't. I believe that our military, and I'm in very close touch with people in the military, they take an oath to the Constitution. And I think that is what is important. And some of you may say, well, John, you're delusional, but I have to believe that. Otherwise, America is not America. Do you all understand that? I don't understand how anybody can vote for Trump after January 6th. January 6th, to me, was the greatest single threat to American democracy, a danger to our country, and instigated by and supported by Donald Trump, who now, by the way, not only pardoned all the January 6th defendants, and a president has absolute power of pardon, but he's putting some of these people into serious positions of responsibility in the Justice Department. It's outrageous. It's egregious. It's horrific. And there seems to be no response. I think Mitch McConnell's mistake, which he made, as I mentioned earlier, in the second impeachment, when he voted to uphold Donald Trump, was that he believed the courts would handle it. And of course, the courts didn't handle it, and we're paying the consequences. January 6th is as important a date in American history as any date to demonstrate the fragility of American democracy. Thank God for Mike Pence. Thank God that Mike Pence had the courage to say no to Donald Trump. But look what happened to Mike Pence. He's gone nowhere. And may I say the same thing about Liz Cheney? Liz Cheney, what I would never have voted for Liz Cheney. I disagreed with her on so many different issues, but I was one of those who nominated her for the Profiles in Courage Award because she deserved it. And the same thing for Mike Pence. What they did on January 6th and in response to January 6th, they deserve Profiles in Courage Awards.
Okay, thank you. Gina says, what about the 13th Amendment and prisoners and forced labor?
It just depends how the court chooses to go along with what Donald Trump wants to do. That's why the Supreme Court is such an interesting question. John Roberts knows that this court will be called the Roberts Court. It's his name on it. And I hope he's worried about how history will judge him. I think the 6 conservative justices, including Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, have demonstrated they are willing to disregard the Constitution. May I say a quick word about birthright citizenship? Just read the 14th Amendment. There is birthright citizenship. It's guaranteed. When our son Samuel was born, he was in the hospital for a month. He was premature. And although you'd never know it today, thank God. But there were women coming in from Hong Kong with visas to have their children in the United States so their children would be citizens in case when the communists took over, it was a disaster. Um, Birthright citizenship has not been ruled on by the Supreme Court. Do you all understand? It hasn't happened yet, but it will be. And that will be a real test as well. If you are a literalist, if you believe the Constitution should be interpreted as written, just read the 14th Amendment. Is there a danger? You bet. And by the way, going back to the 13th Amendment, just see the movie Lincoln. Remember the one that won the Academy Award? It was all about the 13th Amendment and its ratification. But what we now have are Republicans attacking the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And they were theoretically the party that upheld the Constitution.
Valerie, a comment from Valerie. The loyalty to Trump in the Congress is hardly blind. It's based on self-interest and, of course, fear.
That's correct. I have nothing to add. She's absolutely right. What is the job? What is the job of a politician? There are two jobs: to get elected and then to get reelected.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Okay.
don't have, go back. I've been recommending the book Profiles in Courage by John F. Kennedy to people. But of course, Kennedy was a Democrat, you will understand. So his credibility is severely limited in some circles.
There's a comment here. No, it's a question from Zelda. And let me read it. It seems to me Trump is trying to destroy America. And the question is, why? And I wonder if I could just throw into that question something about his relationship with Putin and what's going on with that.
Let me be clear. I don't think he's trying to destroy America. He's trying to remake the United States of America in his image. There are people who believe strongly that what Donald Trump is doing is exactly the right thing to do. And I know where I'm teaching today, and I know where most of your political sentiments are. But if there were a Trump supporter here, that Trump supporter would say that I began my talk to you by talking about the fact that Donald Trump deserves an A for how he's handling the presidency of the United States. And that's true. And there are people who accept that authoritarian view. I do not. And if it were a Democrat, a liberal Democrat, or if it were a liberal Republican, or a Barry Goldwater Republican, I would reject it just as surely. I want to make clear to you that I'm not here as a partisan. I'm giving you my analysis as somebody who is a student of the Constitution, who believes strongly in the American system and in American democracy. And what I see every day is this administration's complete contempt. Can you imagine the Vice President of the United States and the Attorney General of the United States both saying that they might disobey a Supreme Court ruling if they didn't agree with it? Can you imagine that? Anyway, as you can tell, over the next 3 sessions, we're going to have a lot to cover.
Yeah, for sure. But what about, John, what about Putin, Trump's relationship with Putin? What's going on there? No one can understand that.
Oh, no, I understand it very clearly. Donald Trump believed that he could make a deal with Putin, just like he thought he could make a deal with Kim Jong-un, just like he feels he can make a deal with Hamas or with Iran. Donald Trump is the exemplar of the concept of the arrogance of power. And we simply have to admit that we have a president who is an authoritarian. And that's not what American democracy needs. I want an open debate. I don't want to be told if I'm going to give a lecture at a university, well, you can't do it because you don't conform. This is a very disturbing trend. The persecution, and that's what it is, the persecution of Harvard University or of MIT or of Columbia University is astounding to me. By the way, that doesn't excuse the fact that, as many of you know, there have been university presidents who have had to resign because they did not combat Jew hatred effectively. And that's why they paid the consequence. But Donald Trump has taken those examples and tried to turn it around in order to exert power in a way which is terrifying to me and I hope to all Americans. But that's just my opinion. And of course, I'm supposed to be teaching a class, not offering you my opinions. But in this case, because of the way OLLI is structured, I'm able to do this kind of a class. But if look, I have Trump supporters who listen to me on my podcast on a regular basis. They love my podcast, not because they agree with me, but because I make them think, I make them consider, I make them question. And that's what we should do, whether it's a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden. Listen, I raised the question of Joe Biden's children, particularly his son, Hunter, who abused terribly power for whatever reason. And I feel the same way about Donald Trump's children. I don't care if it's somebody I support or somebody I oppose. The Trump family is profiting from the presidency of the United States in an unprecedented fashion. And it is shocking to me because, well, do you remember Sherman Adams, who was Eisenhower's chief of staff, who had to resign? And Sherman Adams was a great man and a good man because he accepted a vicuna coat. We've come a long way from the days when there was a standard of ethics which was meant. And let me tell you, the fact that the Republicans went after the Biden family, and why did Joe Biden have to give pardon to his entire family? Because he was afraid they would be prosecuted by the Justice Department. Well, the corruption of the Trump family is so beyond anything Biden even envisioned. And yet the Republicans turn a blind eye. That to me is a terrible indicator of this partisan nature of politics that we're in today. By the way, I shouldn't be so cavalier. It's not all Republicans. There are Republicans who are highly critical.
Okay, John, I know we've had a very interesting hour and a half. We have a few minutes left, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to come in with a last minute question. They may
Just to
if they
follow
want
up
to.
on,
Oh,
just to
someone-
follow up and ask a question about what John just said. So does all of that set a precedent and it reaches a point of no return?
First of all, there's no such thing as a point of no return.
Okay.
Politics is fluid. But what we will ultimately do, and in 5 years when I teach this course for OLLI, we will talk about the failure of the American political system in coping with this problem. And I want to underline and emphasize, it's not the fact that it's Donald Trump. It's not the fact that Donald Trump is a Republican. Those of you who've taken my classes know I'm equally critical of Democrats when they do this. Some of you will recall my comments about Dianne Feinstein and the fact that because of her husband, Dick Blum, a vast fortune was established. I felt that was wrong, and I made it very clear to Dianne in private conversations and in public on the radio. It's just shocking to me. However, anybody wants to give Kellum a major gift on my behalf, I'd be happy to accept a bribe.
Sure.
I mean, do you understand? That's what it is. It's a corruption that you have to withstand. We had rules on the radio of what I could accept and not accept because they didn't want somebody to be able to bribe me and do something on the radio because I was a public personality. And I will also tell you this, when I was Milton Marks' chief of staff, I had to submit my own financial statement because they were afraid that in the state government, that those of us who worked for members of the legislature might be influenced by bribes. I had to issue a financial statement. By the way, I was not happy about having to do that because there are things that I consider to be private. But I did it because I had no choice and because I guess really I didn't have any secrets. But if you looked at my financial statement, you would have either thought I was close to being a billionaire or maybe a millionaire, just based on a statement which was really inconclusive on every level. But these are the sacrifices that you make in public service. Do you remember the days when there was such a thing as divestment? That if you were president of the United States, you could not have investments, you could not create new businesses, you could not run your business. In fact, when Donald Trump was first elected, he divested himself, in theory, from all of his companies. Of course, he didn't. That's an impeachable offense, for God's sake. But we are living in a different time with a different standard in terms of how we proceed. There's no question about it. Does it disturb me? You bet it does.
Well, thank you so much, John. This has been a fantastic start to our summer program. This is the first class of the summer program. Thank you for kicking it off. It's been really good.
My pleasure. Can I just indicate,
Yeah.
I'm with you for 3 more sessions on Monday. I invite you to put together a list of questions that you may want to ask me. I will do my best to address them, and I can assure you I will keep us posted. We'll have a lot to talk about with the Middle East, with Ukraine, with what's going on in Washington. We are loaded with material, and although we've limited this to about an hour and a half, if you'd wanted me to, we could have gone on for, another 10 or 12 or 14 hours, because this is so important to who we are as a people. And I appreciate the opportunity. I commented recent talk, I don't need a psychiatrist because I have this opportunity to deal with all of you. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be back next Monday at 10 o'clock promptly with all of you.
Thank you very,
Susan.
very much. Thank you, Caleb.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, John. We'll see you next week.
With pleasure.
Thank you,
Okay.
John. It's great to see you back.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.